Things didn't go as planned for Kevin Holland in UFC Orlando, and many people gave him a lot of flack for it. He ran his mouth, and it backfired on him big time. If you want to learn more about what happened to Kevin Holland, stick around until the end of this video. So, without further ado, let's get right into it. First up, what did Bisping have to say? Recently, Kevin Holland faced off and lost against Stephen Thompson at UFC Orlando, and many people are poking fun at how he performed in that fight. Perhaps the most notable of people to criticize Holland's performance in the bout was Michael Bisping. Now, Bisping has the opinion that Kevin Holland gave away his fight against Stephen Thompson. Bisping criticized Holland's performance, and almost immediately after Saturday night's event, he was pretty upset over the fact that at one point in the matchup, Holland had Thompson on the ground. However, instead of doing the sensible thing and dealing out some serious damage, Holland opted to let Wonder Boy get back to his feet. He didn't just do this once, but a bunch of times during the fight. We have to say it's almost certainly because of him doing this that he went home with an L. Bisping came onto the post-fight show at ESPN Plus and weighed in on the Holland v. Thompson fight. He talked about how there's a stigma in MMA that the first person to shoot is a coward. According to him, shooting and getting your opponent on the ground is a part of the sport, and Kevin Holland used that to his advantage pretty well. However, the fact that he kept allowing Thompson to get back up on his feet swung the fight in Thompson's favor. What's more, he also mentioned how it was just low fight IQ for him to keep doing that. Next, what were the main problems Holland faced against Wonderboy? Bisping didn't waste any time in pointing out a few problems he noticed in Holland's game plan thanks to his recent bout. He talked about how Holland had the upper hand many times in the fight because Thompson is primarily a striker and his ground game isn't as good as Holland's. However, the fact that Holland thought it was a good idea to keep allowing a striker who is better at it than him to get back up on his feet clearly shows that he doesn't possess the highest fight IQ out there. It's either that or the fact that he didn't care about winning as much as he did running his mouth during the fight. Bisping also believed that this was just Holland's ego getting the better of it. He talked about how Holland would regret this as he went forward with his career, and this wasn't doing him any favors in the octagon. Plus, he also added that this wasn't a popularity contest and that he was there to finish a job, not act like a clown. He questioned Holland's motives and wondered whether he wanted to be remembered as a champion and one of the greatest fighters to have ever lived, or whether he wanted to be remembered as the guy who just put on a good show and gave away victories. And according to him, losing fights puts you on the fast track to getting dropped by the UFC. Coming up, how did the fight go? The fight itself had a bunch of things wrong with it. From Holland's endless showboating to him just treating the whole thing like a joke, the atmosphere in the octagon didn't feel like it was serious at all. In fact, for most of the fight, the atmosphere felt like it was more like a friendly sparring session rather than a 5-round fight in the UFC. The two fighters constantly high-fived and danced around each other. Every time Thompson threw a few strikes at Holland, Holland ate it all up and smiled back at Thompson. Thompson, who was never known as a mean fighter, smiled back and returned the gesture. The whole thing has left most of us feeling confused, if we're being honest. However, the friendly atmosphere finally managed to shift to something more serious as the fight went on. Holland's smile was soon wiped off his face as he started feeling the effects of Thompson's strikes on his body. The man was hurting, and all that trash talk was finally starting to backfire. He also suffered a broken hand during the fight, which thankfully spared us all from an embarrassing post-match interview at the end of the fight. Holland almost got knocked out toward the end of the 4th round when he ate a punch from Thompson. However, when he finally sat down on his stool, he signaled to the ref, saying he couldn't continue. Finally, can Holland recover? The UFC star has been criticized for talking too much during a fight before as well. It came from none other than Dana White himself, who criticized Holland for being too chatty with his opponents during a fight. Holland did look like he took it to heart and began to focus more on his wrestling for a while. However, it seems like the old habit had come back to full effect in this fight against Thompson. His career hit a skid thanks to a few back-to-back losses. Even when it looked like there was a chance that Holland could recover, if he just shut his mouth and focused on his fight plan instead of trying to talk his opponents to sleep, it seems like all that work was to no avail. It's pretty sad to see all the work his camp put into training him for this fight go to waste because of his showboating. Now let's take a look at what Holland had to say. First up, what happened between Holland and Brunson? Kevin Holland has long been known as a loudmouth fighter who can barely back up all of his trash talk in the octagon for a while now. And it looks like this latest loss on the Wonder Boy isn't going to shut him up anytime soon. The man is back at it with a trash talk, without missing a single beat. After the fight against Thompson, he had to be taken to the hospital to treat his broken hand. That's probably why he didn't immediately reply to all the haters who were talking about his terrible fight IQ in the bout against Thompson. One of these was Derek Brunson. Brunson let loose and talked about how Holland had messed up the Thompson fight. Holland later got back to Brunson and said that this was the first good tweet he'd ever posted. He also talked about the possibility of setting up a rematch between the two shortly to shut up Brunson once and for all. However, with all the terrible decisions this man seems to be making in the octagon, we doubt that'll be happening anytime soon. Next up, does Holland get into Twitter battles often? Now, Kevin Holland is a natural-born trash talker. This man does not stop whenever someone takes a shot at him, especially when it's on Twitter. The UFC fighter can often be spotted firing back at anyone who talks bad about him, and he often comes off as a savage. There's no denying that he's good at comebacks. One of these Twitter battles was against an esports player who'd bet money on Holland winning the recent fight against Thompson. He talked about how Holland was a disappointment, and from what he can tell, Holland didn't take it too kindly. It's safe to say you should never mess with Kevin Holland when it comes to a Twitter battle. Holland fired back at the esports player by telling him that the only thing that wasn't classy here was the fact that he was wasting his money by betting on a sport as volatile as MMA. He also name-dropped the disgraced coach, James Krause, who has since been banned from the UFC for being involved in a questionable betting scandal. This man does not let anyone get away with calling him out on social media. He might not be able to back up all of his trash talking in the octagon, but he sure can roast the hell out of you on Twitter. Coming up, Holland takes aim at Jorge Masvidal. Holland recently started another controversy by aiming at Masvidal during one of his Twitter battles. It seems like this man cannot keep himself out of trouble. He just constantly goes off against anyone who even remotely has involvement in dissing him. Recently, he was compared to Jorge Masvidal after his recent loss to Thompson. He fired back almost immediately by saying that he isn't the one going around sucker punching people. Instead, he's the guy who punches suckers. Okay, this wasn't his best piece of work, but it did the trick. Now all the MMA fans on Twitter are buzzing about a potential fight between Kevin Holland and Jorge Masvidal. We're not gonna lie, we're pretty excited too. The prospect of seeing one of the most dangerous fighters in the UFC go up against possibly the biggest trash talker in UFC has to offer is something that'll draw in a large crowd. However, if we had to put our money on someone, judging by his recent performances, it definitely wouldn't be Kevin Holland. We're sorry, but the man is too volatile of a fighter. He just can't seem to be trusted whenever he steps into the octagon. Finally, when will Holland be back in the octagon? Now, in case you guys haven't gotten the memo yet, our boy is out of the UFC picture thanks to a broken hand he suffered during the fight against Thompson. From the looks of things, it's pretty bad, and we shouldn't expect to see him return to the octagon anytime soon. When he does eventually return though, we hope he's in better shape than he was in his recent bouts. All the dude needs, honestly, is to learn to stay quiet, just a tad bit more than he usually does, and focus more on the game plan that his coach is so desperately tries to instill in his head. If he can do that, he'll soar to the top of the UFC. There's no telling what he can achieve if he just puts his mind to it. Unless he decides to get serious and make up his mind on what he wants out of his career, nothing can be done for the guy. Well, that's a wrap for this video. Do you think Kevin Holland was as bad as Bisping said? Let us know in the comments below. Make sure to give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel for more videos like this. See you at the next one.